All the nuance, with all the ancillaries, all the subtleties. It's a RaShI Sicha. It's a very technical Sicha. This is a RaShI Sicha, right? Last week was a Chumash Sicha. The Sicha is very technical, very technical. It's very, very, very exact. You have to look up the psukim. I mean, I spent my whole time looking up the psukim on the phone. Problem is, the different Mefarshim explain the psukim in such different ways that if you look in the wrong Mefedish, you don't understand the Sicha. You have to look dafka in the Mefarshim that the Rebbe brings to understand what the Rebbe is trying to say. It's very, very, very exact. So I'll tell you up front, we're going to learn the RaShI Sicha, but we're going to spend most of the time on the Chassidus, which is not normally how we do it. Normally we learn the RaShI Sicha and then we shut it down. So we'll go through the RaShI Sicha. I'm going to learn it with you.
This week's Torah.
So it's Nichnas Yayi and Yotze Seid. So the Sicha is 6 pages long. More than a third of the Sicha is the Hira. The RaShI Sicha is less than 4 amudim. It ends by Sif Vav. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn the Rashi with you. I'm going to go straight to the answers. I'm not going to the questions. The questions are incredibly technical. The Vart, however, is that every single question that the Rebbe asks, he answers with such exactitude. It's just wonderful to see. You know, I told you the Ma'aseh to be Ashabed that this guy was complaining about Koli Rashi, and he told him, I understand that you're upset, but you should know when you read this Sefer, you should hear it as if Rashi himself was telling you, this is how you have to learn the Rashi. This RaShI Sicha is so precise. It's so exact. The kashas that Rebbe asks are impossible to resolve. Impossible. There's a pasuk in TaNaCh which says the same word 3 times. And Rashi brings the 3rd time. Not the 1st time, not the 2nd time, the 3rd time. Same one pasuk. To suck this out of this, to suck blood out of your nose, and to Rashi brings the 3rd one. Why the first one and the 2nd one? And every single detail is genoy. It's perfect. It's mamish perfect. In other words, you understand that the Rebbe is understanding what Rashi was thinking. Bepashtas. So here we go. In Pasuk, the Pasuk is V'krive yakein al mizbeach. The Kohen brings kos mizbeach or malakas reishei. He does malika. He uses the back of his nail to do malika. Malika means you kill the bird by breaking its spine, not by shechting its throat, but the back of the neck. V'hikter ha-mizbecha, you put on the mizbeach, and then it says these words: V'nimtza dame al mizbeach. The blood will be found on the wall of the mizbeach. How do you spell nimtza?
Hey.
Nimtza spelled with an aleph.
No, here it's hey.
Right. Here it's with a hey. In the Haggadah Shel Pesach, in the Bracha V'asher Galanu, we say nimtza dame al mizbeach. I think it's with an aleph, because that's a Korban Pesach. Here it's nimtza with a hey. Nimtzo hay means you have to squeeze it. Because how do they do malika? They would shech the bird, and then there was a whole thing. They separate the head from the body, and they would put the blood on the wall of the mizbeach. This is a korban oif. It's a bird. Now, just parenthetically, just a technical detail, which is good to know. As you are aware, the mizbeach had a gartel. Mizbeach had a girdle at 29 tvachim. The mizbeach was 58 tvachim high. A chut shel sikra. It was a red thread which was exactly at the midpoint of the mizbeach. To separate damim malyenim from damim tachteim. It's chelik yud zayin. The higher bloods from the lower bloods. The halacha was azoi. All karbanis, it's chelik yud zayin. If you bring a Likutei Sichos, I only made 10 copies. There's more than 10 people.
Go to the shelf.
All karbanis, that means a oila and a shlamim and an osham and chveisas amchoir, a ma'asev, a pesach. All karbanis except for a korban chatos, the blood was sprayed below the Likutei Sichos. Chatois, the blood was on top of the Likutei Sichos. He would put with his finger on the corners. By oif, it was backwards. Chatos ha'oif is under the Likutei Sichos. Oilas ha'oif is above the Likutei Sichos. I have no idea why, but that's the mitzias. By birds, it's backwards. By animal karbanas, all karbanas except for chatas, the blood is beneath the Likutei Sichos, and the chatas is above. And by oif, it's backwards. This is oilas ha'oif. This is a chatas ha'oif. You're bringing a chatas, oilas ha'oif. I'm sorry. Oilas ha'oif, of course, goes over there. Chatas ha'oif, by the way, Kainim ate them. Chatas ha'oif in a pigeon. How much chicken, how much meat you have in a pigeon? But the chatas ha'oif, the Kainim ate. And understand that it's halachically treif. They didn't do shchita, they did malika. So if the kohen did malika, there was a problem with the carbon. The kohen was eating treif. If he did malika, there was no problem with the carbon. That was it. Shchita was considered kosher. Shchita would have been treif. So it's a very serious business, malika. It was after the back of the neck. It wasn't the front of the neck. So oila, the whole thing went on the mizbeach. The whole little tiny bird, yeah? The chatos, they somehow took it apart. They found the little meat. It's not a chicken. It's a pigeon. It's a pigeon. And the kohen ate it. But they had to put blood on the mizbeach. And the lashon HaPosuk is ונמצה, with a hay. Which means you have to squeeze it out. So let's read the RaShI. Is RaShI meitik von die Werte ונמצה dome? On the Pasuk ונמצה with a hay dome. When there's mafarish, he says lashon mitz apayim. Mitz apayim means anger. Mitz apayim, when you squeeze out anger, yetze meriva is going to come a fight. That's not like the Pasuk. Mitz means to squeeze. If you're going to squeeze out anger, it's going to create a fight. And the second pasuk is, and this is the pasuk in Yeshaya, ki ofes hametz. This is a pasuk in Tazayin in Yeshaya. I looked up the pasuk, and the Navi Yeshaya is talking to Moav. I don't know if you studied Yeshaya. Every Pedic is different nevuah, and they're addressed to different people. You have sometimes prakim that are rehemshach, but everybody, it's like it's sermons. You know, he told this one this. It's all nevuah. And he's talking to Moav, and he's saying to Moav, be nice to the Jews, be nice to the Yidden. The Yidden are running into Golus, they ran away from Sancherev, yeah? And Moav was mistreating the Jews, and Yeshai says, don't do it, you're making a mistake, be nice to them. Because you know how it feels yourself. You know how it feels yourself to be disadvantaged. And in this pasuk, it's Tezayin Dalet. It says in footnote 4, Tezayin Dalet. I actually took out the pasuk. Office mitz, RaShI translates means animals that give you parnasa by squeezing. Sheep and goats that you milk. And office hamitz means you could run out of it. It could dry up. So mitz means a noun, not a verb. In the first pasuk, mitz apaya means if you squeeze anger out of yourself, you bring it forward out of yourself, it's going to create a fight. So it's a verb. It's an action. The second pasuk is ofes hametz. There is a thing called mates. In this case, it's the udders of an animal that produces milk. And mates means if you would squeeze it, something would be squeezed out. So it's an entity of squeezing. And ofes hametz means that the mates can end. There can be no more of it. Now, the RaShI doesn't explain the word ofes. He just explains the word mates, which makes it hard to know for sure what's the pshat, but that's how I understand it. So RaShI is trying to explain the meaning of the word ונמצה with a hay, and he brings two psukim. One pasuk is from Mishlei, which is in Ksuvim. The second pasuk is in Yeshaya, which is from Nevi'im, that it means to squeeze. The difference is that the first pasuk is describing the act of squeezing, and the second pasuk is not describing the act of squeezing, it's describing the squeezable. You understand? The squeeze, the phenomena of something which is meant to be squeezed. And then RaShI explains, Kovetz beis hashchita al kira mizbeach. The place where the shchita took place, you press against the wall of the mizbeach. V'adam mismatzed, the blood is pressed out of the body of the bird and the head of the bird. V'yedet, and it falls down. Okay, so it actually there was many kashas. In this RaShI is doing two things. He's explaining the word ונמצה with a hay, and he's explaining what it means, what happened. The translation of the word ונמצה means the phenomena either of squeezing or squeezability. That's not a word, but something that could be squeezed. And then in the same RaShI, he explains to you why this word is used here, because they would squeeze the blood out of the head of the bird and put it on the wall of the mizbeach. Okay? The Rebbe's kashas are gewaldig. When you read the Rebbe's kashas, I stood by Fabrengen. When the Rebbe would ask his RaShI Sichos, and then he would say, "Ukfi she'is ba'al lakamon," you were convinced that this week is not getting out of it. You had this happen to me. It happened to me hundreds of times. I mean, Moshe, for you probably the Chvesim even more. The Rebbe would present a RaShI. He would ask you kashas, and you were convinced that there's no way out. Then he gave you time to think about it, because he would break. I told you this many times. He would break to give mashke. It was the longest break in the Fabrengen was between the kashas and the terutz. Right? The Rebbe said there were two sichos and a maimer. The maimer was the shortest sicha of the Fabrengen. After the Maimer, the Rebbe used to literally prepare the Rashi and the Zohar Bam Fabrengen. They would open up the Chumash Rashi. It's the only time the Rebbe opened the Sefer. Open the Chumash and look inside. Then he would take out his father's Agos and Zayr and look inside. And then he would say, but again, it was a Kenog B'chol Shabbos. That is Mefarish Pirasha Al Teira, and then Rashi is Ani Leibosi Lefarish El Pshuta Shal Mikra. And he would say what pasuk he's speaking on. He would tell you the pasuk. He would tell you the Rashi. He would explain it. And then he would ask kashas. And then he would say, Ukafi sheyizbaya lakama. Now, when the Rebbe made the takon of Rambam, so then was Rambam. Right? The Rambam always spoke shleisha parakam l'yayim. Never once did the Rebbe speak on Perek Echad l'yayim. He would be mitzvah the Rambam. He would ask his kashas. He would say, Ukafi sheyizbaya lakama.
Was it extra sicha or the same sicha?
Same sicha. And if it was during the summer, it means Benegel l'Pirkei Avos, same thing. He would quote a Mishnah. He would explain it. That's kashas. Ukafi sheyizbaya lakama.
Were the RaShI and the Rambam really connected somewhat?
No, not necessarily. It was the 3 weeks or the 4 weeks to Chamisha Sabayav. He would speak Beis Abchira. B'matzia Rambam Beis Abchira. He would ask you about Chikashet. Then he would say Benegei to the Hagos from TaNaCh and Zayar. He would quote a Zayar, or in the summer there's not a lot of Zayar. Most of the Zayar is Beishas Hashmeis. Ravika Bidvarm is in one krach. So he would find a Zayar. Don't worry, the Rebbe had no problem finding stuff. He said, my father didn't have paper, my father didn't have ink, so he wrote very bekitzer. And also he had no time to write the ha'ara. In my days, it was almost every time. The Yerona Vedas Hashem, and Zechva lost. Aber vet allein verstehen. So the Rebbe says, this is what I want to understand. Either what's the pshat my father wrote, but more often than not, that meine Yarden was what's the Yerona Vedas. Ukafishi is by the kam. And they would say, all those who gave mashke for an inyan of Siburi should come up l'mayla, and with them in mashke, and oisru from Faranelam what it is, and then the Rebbe would say they should give a little bit out by Fabrengen, and then the rest they should take for the event, and then people would line up. The longest break, it could be 20, on a Shabbos with a lot of archem, it could be 15, 20 minutes, and all over the show. We were cooking. This one's talking Rashi, this one's talking Rambam. Not too many of us are worried about the Zohar, but the Sichot and Rashi. And you were so convinced. Then came the longest Sicha of Fabrengen. In one Sicha sometimes.
How long is long?
It could be over an hour, which is very long. He would go through each one. Sometimes he divided it up in half, and sometimes he would forget and come back to it later, or B'chalman come back to it. They had all kinds of inyanim, but as a rule, he would go back and answer every question. So the and the Rebbe would speak 20 seconds, half a minute, and it was like a chiropractor just. And he hadn't explained anything. Oh my God, I'm stupid. It's so obvious. After 20 seconds, you got it. He would move you. You should look at the Rashi from a little bit different angle and everything. And then after he would explain it and he would answer every question. In the good to show, if there was 15 kashas, he answered every kasha. Sometimes he would miss one or two, but answer every kasha. Then he did the same thing with Rambam, and the same thing with Pirkei Avos, and the same thing with Beis Abchira, and the same thing with Zayar. The Sicha go on for a long time. Anyway, so this is one of those Sichas. The kashas are gewaldig. And the tenet is so glatt. It's so glatt. There's no question that this is exactly what Rashi meant. If you read the kashas, there's 6 of them. Yeah? And then you listen to the tenet, it's so glatt. And let's read the tenets. The bir becholza, the explanation is as follows. Rashi kumt nicht blois ob teichen dem Wort ונמצה. Rashi is not translating the word ונמצה that it means to squeeze. That's Rashi's issue. Because if Rashi's issue was translated ונמצה, he would just translate the word, he wouldn't say anything more. And if he would say something more, he would say it in 2 different dibra maschels. Nor oich verefren ashayla. Rashi has a question. Rashi has a question. What is the meaning of the word ונמצה? I don't know, right? ונמצה, but hey, I don't know what it means. But one thing I know for sure about ונמצה. It's a nifal, it's not a pile. Whatever ונמצה means, it's an effect, it's not an action. Right? It doesn't say umotza, it says ונמצה. If it said umotza, vav mem tzadik hey, we would know what it means. ונמצה creates a problem because ונמצה sounds like it's happening by itself. Even if you don't know what the word means, ונמצה means it's happening by itself. That's what's bothering Rashi. That's the chiropractic snap that the Rebbe has to give. That's it. Now everything falls into place. The Rashi's big issue is not the translation of the word, but the fact that it sounds like it's not a pa'ula. You see? And that's it. You see how it took 10 seconds. And boom, it all fits. Yeah, ונמצא זה הלושן נפעל. ונמצה is a reaction, it's not a proaction. It's an effect, not a cause. Was meint, it seems to be indicating, as das wird getan von sich allein. This is what's bothering Rashi. It sounds to me, says Rashi, that the blood is placed on the Mizbeach in such a way that nobody puts it there, just somehow gets there. Der Dam wird von sich allein ausgequetscht al kira Mizbeach. The blood appears to be self-squeezed onto the wall of the Mizbeach. Dorach prefect Mizbeach. The Kohen brings the bird close, he does the Malika, and somehow by doing the Malika, the blood ends up on the wall. Or the Dorach the Malika, or is it moving? Men weiss von früher, next paragraph, we know as a fact, as by Korban, Eilam, and Abhemas, and Efarandi, avoid this for Shechita, is a pro-action. You have to do something, and it's described as a pro-action. Zrikas Adam, Shechita, shechting the animal, Zrikas Adam al HaMizbeach, spraying the blood of the Mizbeach, when Aktar offering up the Evarim and the Emidim, is the Shayla, the question is, Avodas HaShechita v'Aktar, the equivalent of Shechita, and the equivalent of offering up. Gefindt men oich by Ela Seif, top of the second column, page 17, you find by a bird as well. But Malkum Shechita is by Eifta Malika. Instead of Shechita, there's Malika. Men gefindt abenish, we don't find, however, by Elas Ha'ef, by the oil of a carbon Eif, an avoida, a work, an action, a pro-action, dugmas avedas zrikas hadam al mizbech. We don't have in the Chumash an example of where by a bird was the equivalent of spraying the blood proactively onto the Mizbeach. The Rebbe, this is what's going on in Rashi's head. Nachdem wie Rashi bring the Raya Seif in Lashon ונמצה, he has to Pasha translate the word. Because ונמצה with a hey, we don't know what it means, and he has to translate it means to squeeze. Bavarenter, he immediately explains, when his Masbir, as der Nifal from ונמצה, that the meaning of the word ונמצה in this case, its taka means a reaction, but it's a reaction that comes from a pro-action. Durach an avoida p'ulas ha'adam, there's a work and a pro-action of a person. Una p'ula miyuchad has a specific function. Koivish beis hashchita al kira mizbeach, he presses the place of the shchita on the wall of the mizbeach, v'adam esmatzav ed, the blood is pressed out and falls. Al derech v'avoidas zrikas hadam al mizbeach. What the Rebbe is saying is, Rashi is saying, don't let ונמצה fool you. Right? Think about it very simply. When a Kohen sprays blood on the Mizbeach, what happens? The blood is on the Mizbeach. But the Torah doesn't describe what happens, the Torah describes what he's doing. So Rashi says, just like by a regular carbon, the Pasuk says that he sprays it, and he figures, understand yourself, if he sprays it, then it was sprayed. By oif it's the same thing, but backwards. The Pasuk tells you the effect, and Rashi says, but this effect came from a cause. Rashi's issue.
If Rashi didn't explain that to us, what would we think?
We would have a kasha. How did it get there? How did the blood get there?
What does ונמצה mean? Without Rashi, what does it mean?
ונמצה means it will have been squeezed.
There's something else here. By Behema, it went into the Klishars. Here it didn't.
Okay. Yeah, okay, true.
So when you're reading just in the Chumash, you realize the Kohen had to do something.
Okay, his question is bothering more than yours.
Yeah.
Let's wait. You have to understand, there's two psukim that Rebbe quoted. Remember, I pointed it out. The first pasuk is an action, and the second pasuk is a noun. It's the inyan of squeezing out. It's very, very precise. But let's see. Okay? Al Pize is moving. Since what's bothering Rashi in this pasuk is not what ונמצה means, what's bothering Rashi is, so what did the Kohen do? I mean, the simple answer to your question is the Torah should describe the pro-action and not the reaction. No. So, because of that question, you would suspect that there's another way for it to happen. But your point is well taken, and I think it's part of what I'm going to address now. So, Rashi's ikir issue is, how come the Torah doesn't say what to do? The Torah says what happens, and he tells you it means you're going to do it, and it will have happened. That's the word. Now, al pize, once you understand that although ונמצה sounds like something,
then you will squeeze it.
Right.
That's what RaShi's saying.
That's what Chazi's saying. It's self-understood. Because the word means to squeeze.
And it will be squeezed.
It will have been squeezed. So you say, so obviously someone had to do it. Right. So,
Now RaShi's not making it a child. It's not a Gemara.
but why is it not self-understood? Is what Chazi is saying. But let's keep going. Al Pizeh is moving with RaShI kleibt ois di raya zavke. The Rebbe says this many times in TaNaCh that the word metitza, to squeeze, exists. And first of all, RaShI chooses weird ones. He doesn't choose the right order. Like I told him before, this pasuk, mitz apayim, has the word metitza 3 times in it. And RaShI chooses the third. The third of 3. One of them is to suck blood out of a body. Another one is to suck other kind of a fluid out of a body. And RaShI chooses the third. Is moving with RaShI Kleipta is di rayas dafka von die 2 psukim. He chooses these 2 proofs for these 2 psukim. Weil in zei is mudgish, these 2 psukim underscore as their teuchen from ונמצה. The meaning of the word ונמצה. Mitz. Now understand, ונמצה is a reaction, it's a verb, right? Mitz is a noun. The thing of squeezing is verbunden mit peulas ha'adam. It requires a person to be involved, kvisha, to squeeze. So RaShI is careful to look through the TaNaCh and to find a word that clearly means that you're doing it, not that it's happening. And the reason he wants to do this is because he wants ונמצה to mean not that it's happening, that you're doing it. Turn the page. Turn the page 18. Okay. Von dem Umfang von Pasuk in Mishlei. Mitz chalav yetzi chema. From squeezing out milk, you'll get chema. Chema means the liquid of milk. Or mitz af yetzi dam, if you squeeze the nose, blood is going to come out. So the Rebbe proves that both of those psukim are not adequate. Why? Is nish keirayla needed in that? For a variety of different reasons. One of them is to get blood out of the nose, you don't have to squeeze it, you have to zetz it. To get the whey out of milk, sometimes you don't have to do anything, just let it sit and it'll separate by itself. So RaShI chooses the third one, because even though you have the same word 3 times, mitz, and in each case it means to extract one thing from another, the third one has to mean mitz apayim, when you squeeze out anger, an action. So in one pasuk, you have the word mitz 3 times. RaShI chooses the third of the 3 because that third time, mitz must mean to squeeze out. Next paragraph, the Rebbe brings RaShI. Accordingly, RaShI brings dem siyam akasav dafka at the end of the pasuk, mitz apayim yitziriv. When you squeeze out anger, it's going to make a fight. Now, darkness der mitz oifen selben oifen wie kevish beis hashchita. Because in that circumstance, the word mitz and the word kevish beis hashchita are behaviorally, are actionably exactly the same thing. Durch arois quetschen und aroisdicken, by squeezing and pressuring, lechutz dem kas, to put out the anger. Yitziriv, anger, fighting comes out, just like in this case. ונמצה doesn't mean the blood is coming out by itself. You're squeezing it out. Now this may be the answer to your question, Chazi. If you have milk, which is unpasteurized, right? Milk from a cow, and you put it in a bowl, yeah? The cream is going to separate from the whey by itself, right? So that time, you could use the word mitz 1 second, and it doesn't have to mean that you have to squeeze it out. It could mean it'll separate by itself. So you have in this pasuk the word ונמצה mitz 3 times. In one of them, it's conceivable that the whey separates from the milk by itself. And the other one, it's not by squeezing it, it's by hitting the guy's nose. So RaShI has to say that ונמצה over here doesn't mean that the blood separates from the bird, it's that you separate it from the bird. And this, I think you're not going to know automatically, because the word mitz can mean in a variety of different ways. Mitz could mean it emerges by itself. Mitz could mean it emerges through a clap, and mitz could mean it emerges through a squeeze. So RaShI has to say that ונמצה with a hay doesn't mean that the blood comes out of the head of the animal. You squeeze it out. And his raya is from mitz apayim. Now, how does RaShI know that? How does RaShI know that getting the blood out of the head of the bird is by squeezing it rather than by some other means? Because by zrika there's a pro-action. When you shech the behemoth, you don't let the blood end up on the, you sprinkle the blood, so RaShI assumes that by an oif, just like the malika is parallel to the shechita, and the aktorah is parallel to aktorah, so the way the blood goes to Mizbeach has to, so Rashi knows from Zrika that over here the blood has to be done by you, it's not going to happen by itself. The word ונמצה can mean a variety of different things. So he's going to find a pasuk that's going to serve Rashi's purposes, that in this case, it's not the blood from the bird's head is ending at Mizbeach, you're squeezing it out. And this Rashi has to say, you would have to agree, this Rashi has to say. It's very exact. It's incredibly precise.
Something that you do.
Something you do proactively, right?
On a practical sense, you imagine that the Mokum Hamarika is going to be bloody, and therefore you can just smear without squeezing.
Right. Or you can even, like by a chatas, they sprayed it. ונמצה.
Squeezed it out.
Right. Right. Correct. And you would not know that from the word Metitza alone.
It's equivalent to the Zrika.
Correct. Third paragraph, page 18. Diraya alein is Abba Nishmaspik. The pasuk mitzah payim yaitzi riv, which means that if a person squeezes anger out of his system from his subconscious to his consciousness, he's going to end up with a fight. The advantage of this pasuk is that it's describing a proaction, something that I'm doing. But there's a problem. Why? Varam der mitzvah payim is nita pa'ula. Is a pa'ula nita maise. Squeezing anger out of your personality, how do you do? Where's your anger muscle? What do you squeeze? It's it's ruchnius. Squeezing out of anger really means letting the anger out. You don't have to squeeze the anger out, you let the anger out. It's psychological, it's spiritual, right? And we're applying that phenomena of spiritually squeezing out of anger to squeezing blood out of the head of a chicken, of a bird. Nitvi koivesh beis hashchita versus an asiya, which is different than the squeezing of the head of shchita, which is a proaction. The Rebbe bringt Rashi oich den padmi, the second pasuk, and in the second pasuk, office ha-mates, over here it's a noun. What does mates mean? Squeezed entities, things that are squeezed. Like the udders of an animal, you could squeeze them and get out milk. Before you squeeze them, they're called an entity of squeezing. So we're not describing the action. We're describing the thing that's being squeezed, right? Was dort meint es, in that case it means, wie Rashi sagt dorten, dem chele v'chema, the milk and the cheese, welche out von the baka from sheep and cattle. Was das is anasiya, it's an action, und der chelev kommt nicht durch hakah, the milk is not accepted by hitting on it, nor durch kvetchen mamish, squeezing it out mamish. So he brings you a second example. And the second example is describing a proaction. Right? There's an animal, and it has milk, and you get the milk out by squeezing it. So, this second raya fits better to ונמצה דומי. What's the problem? The second raya is not describing doing it. The second raya is describing the potential to do it. Because the word mitz doesn't mean that you're squeezing it, it's that it's meant to be squeezed. The second Afes HaMeitz, allein, is eigentlich genug. It's not also enough. Why? Worum dorten ken men nicht lernen. In that pasuk, you cannot say the pshat, der Wort Meitz is nit magisch die Pu'ulas HaMitzvus gufa. The word Meitz means a squeezable thing. But it's not describing the squeezing. It's describing the possibility to squeeze. Nor says belois atoyer, it's a description from oisha v'chov from the wealth of the animals, that they have a lot of milk. Was is apoya yaitza from them, it's an effect of the fact. Was man is from say moitet cholav v'chem, you extract the milk and cheese. But the word mitz doesn't mean the act of squeezing, it means the phenomena of extracting milk and cheese from them, which makes me rich. Rashi Taish, every quotes Rashi, Hamitz shalacha, your juice, right? What's mitz? Juice. In modern Hebrew, mitz means juice. What does juice mean? You squeeze it out of an apple. In this case, you're squeezing it out of an animal. Asharcha, your wealth and your honor, shahayalacha, what you received, for the sheep and the goat, because you squeeze out of that milk and cheese. But in the word mitz, you don't have the act of squeezing, you have the phenomena of the squeezable. So the Rebbe continues. The Rebbe darf Rashi bringen euch und zum Ersten. The first pasuk Rashi brings is mitzah payim, and he brings it first, because in mitzah payim you have the most important part, the pro-action of squeezing. The only problem with the first raya, mitzah payim, is that it's a psychological thing rather than a physical thing. So to support the psychological thing, he brings also the word mitz as it relates to a physical thing which is squeezed, even though on that pasuk it's not describing squeezing itself. The Raya from mitz apayim was mitz meint mamish die peula von kwetschen mit mamish peula. In other words, I know, I sound like a brother. This is so exact. There's so many psukim in TaNaCh that mean to squeeze. You have no idea. There's so many psukim, and the Rebbe mentions them. A pasuk in Shoftim, a pasuk here, a pasuk there. But these are the two perfect psukim, and in this order. There's no one pasuk in TaNaCh which can be used to describe physically squeezing a fluid out of a salad, which would parallel this ונמצה. There's no such pasuk. In many instances, it's happening by itself. In many instances, it's happening by giving it a bang rather than by squeezing it. And in many instances, it's not actually squeezing it, it's the phenomena of squeezability. So RaShI has no choice. He brings you the two psukim that together out what ונמצה means. The first describes an act of squeezing, but about something psychological. The second describes the things which could be squeezed, but it's not an action. By joining the two together, you understand what ונמצה means. It's incredibly exact. It's unbelievably exact. Bemis. It's unbelievably exact. Sif Hey. Please, Sif Hey, page 19. What the Rebbe does in Sif Dal is he goes through all the psukim that RaShI should have quoted and explains why he doesn't quote them. Pasuk in Shoftim, another pasuk in Mishlei.
So here there's the act and therefore has been two pesukim.
Here, one pasuk describes an action, but it speaks about a davar ruchni. So he brings the second pasuk with davar gashmi. Right, it's intangible. The second pasuk is davar gashmi, but he's not describing the act of squeezing, but the phenomena of squeezing. So he joins them together in that order. Says, hey, es bleibt aber nicht verstanden. The question is still, was ist dann geht zu madgish sein? Why is that important to underscore? As the mitzi adam is given, is dafke durch kevish. What's wrong with saying the blood ends up on the mizbeach? You shecht an animal, and you whatever, like you said, the blood is leaking out. Why do you have to emphasize that you're squeezing it? Was der Fahrt darf RaShI bringen die zwei psukim, and now the RaShI has to interpret ונמצה, not that it's ending up in the berg, but you're squeezing on the berg, has to bring these two psukim. Und nicht durcheinander pula. What's, just paint it on, spray it on. What's the diuk of ונמצה? V'yashleim up here now the teretz is. V'ibal does RaShI let it. Since RaShI holds, as ונמצה is b'mokim with a dugmas hazrika, it's the parallel of by a behemoth spraying the blood of HaMizbeach. Is mistaber, it's therefore logically unreasonable to assume, as the pu'ulas haba nadimin, that these two actions have a similarity, sufficient between themselves. And zrika is a pro-action. So ונמצה has to be a pro-action. Und das ist dafke, this is only possible, es wird getan durch Kvisha, if you squeeze it out, wie bei der Schritte. Top of the second column, page 19. Dam was geht areis durch Klappen. Blood which comes out by giving the animal a zetz. Like for example, the pasuk in Mishlei, mitz af yitzidam, you hit a guy in the nose, blood comes out. That's not squeezing it, it's hitting. Is es nish beoifen, it's not in such a way as the dam kommt beseder durch sein keseder de gepu'ula. When you hit somebody's nose and he bleeds, you hit him for 1 second and he bleeds for 5 minutes. So you're not making him bleed for 5 minutes, you're hitting him and the blood comes by itself. But when you squeeze, every instant you're squeezing is extracting more blood. Sein Klappen is geidem da scholas haitzir von dem Dam. Your zetz initiates the flow of blood. V'ach geide noch me'atzmei ha-meshech, man pause by itself. Masha enkein, second paragraph, second column, page 19. By mashkiv, was kumen areis durch kvisha, liquid which emerges durch squeezing, like a chaylev v'sabehemok yete bezeh, is the hemshech ha-yitzir from the mashke. Not just the initial flow, but the whole continuum of the flow. Your continuing act of squeezing. In as much as ונמצה dame is b'mokem zrika v'azah, the same place as sprinkling blood. Was kommt in ganzen the pu'os ha'koyin, which the koyin does from beginning to end. The Rebbe let RaShI, therefore RaShI has to hold ונמצה doesn't mean that blood ends up on the mizbeach, but that he's squeezing it onto the mizbeach, as das is azay eich ונמצה dame durch kevish beis tashchita. When you spray the blood from the beginning of the act till the end of the act of getting the blood of the mizbeach, you do. So ונמצה dame al kir mizbeach with a hey has to mean that from the beginning of the act of getting the blood of the word on the mizbeach until the end, you have to do. So RaShI has no choice but to say that ונמצה means to squeeze. Now this went pretty easy. It went good. But again, you didn't learn all the kashas. It's incredibly exact. It's so exact. You have to say when you learn this Sicha, not that Rebbe figured out what RaShI was thinking. This is what RaShI was thinking. Kipshute. Okay, that's it. Let's move on. Now we see this. Okay. Meyena shel Torah was is da in Pirish RaShI Sicha. What's the Chassidus in this RaShI of squeezing the head of the animal to get the blood out? Says Yedua was the Ramban zog when the Avedas of the Tut Mitakarbon. Everybody knows the Ramban, right? The only thing that people don't know is that it's the Ramban who says it. What does the Ramban said? Skip the parenthesis. As the Mensch darf trachten, it says, even by Kaparis it says, you're supposed to think this. Ki chotla lekov begufei benafshei. He have sinned to my God with my body and my soul. V'roi loi yishofech damei v'yisaref gufei. And the person is worthy, chas v'sham, that his blood should be spilled and his body should be burnt. Lule chesed abeir, if not for the kindness of the Creator, shalokach mimenu tmuro, gives him a replacement, which is damei da carbon tachas damei, the blood of the animal against the person's blood, nefesh tachas nefesh, life for life, and so on. So when you're bringing a carbon, the kavana is that this is happening to me. So when you're doing oilos ha'oif, and you're squeezing out the blood, you're squeezing it out of yourself. With the emphasis on the pro-action of squeezing. Und das ist echt der Teuchen in. It's also explained. Was mismakrev dem chelev ha-carbon b'dami from bech. When you put the fat and the blood, of course fat represents pleasure, and blood represents passion, and daf makrev zayin avegeb, so maybe your passion and your pleasure. Turn the page. 20. Okay? Und der Rebbe, accordingly, beim Siyam from ersten Suk for Karbonos. When the Torah finishes the first category of Karbonos, versteht in the Torah, which is carbonela. Okay? Skip the bracket. Is RaShI medayik. Right? First you have Oilas Behema, Minatzei, Minaboka, then you have Oilas Hoif. So at the end of that passage, RaShI says, ונמצה דמי. By Zrikas Adam, when you sprinkle the blood, was in them is the Iker HaKapara, the primary event of atonement is by sprinkling the blood. But by a bird, you don't sprinkle it, you do ונמצה. As the Inyan HaKapara from carbon besteht in them, the idea of a carbon consists of the fact, Inyan HaMitz, the phenomena of squeezing, kvisha. What does that mean in Avoida? The eskafia. Bittel von seinem Metzias. You have to squeeze the head of the bird to extract blood, which will give eskafia in Avoida. When demelt, and then hadam esmatzav, the blood is collected and it spills out. Es wird arois gequetscht, it's squeezed out, und geht von ihm weg, and it goes away from the person. Dem koch, in taivas ha'elam, blood represents passion. Squeezing out the blood means squeezing out the passion. So when you finish the parasha of Oila, you have the word ונמצה דמי, that navoida, when you're bringing a carbon, which means adam yakrev mekeb, you're offering up yourself, you're squeezing the blood out of yourself with derech haskafia. Und der Fall bringt RaShI loshen mit apayim, you have to squeeze out anger. Or you could squeeze out anger. Weil in dem inyan from mit apayim yetzirev, in these words, when you squeeze out anger, you create machlokes. Weil in dem inyan from mit, drikt sich ois beremes, it expresses in a hint, dem teichen koli von achet, the idea of a sin in general, und dem eifen atshuva kabbalah achet, and as well as the method of tshuva and atonement for the sin kidel akama. So in the words mitzvah paim yaitiriv, you have two things. Number one, how to do the aveira, and number two, how to fix the aveira. And he continues. What does the pasuk say? Mitzvah paim. What is mitzvah paim? You squeeze out anger. Says the Rebbe in Siv Zayin. Regarding Kath, it says in Gemara. It says in Zoyar. It's brought in Rambam. Amru Chazal. Look at footnote 33. I'll see how busy it is. If you get angry, it's like you're an idol worshiper. With the Alter Rebbe is masbid as b'shas hakas. When you get angry, you forget about achsa. Why are you getting angry? Because you believe that this person hurt you, and you forget about ashkacha pratis. Right? 5 lines into the second count that says in other words. In dem inyan akas rikt sichos, when one is angry, what is he communicating? The Abgerissenkeit von Oibersten. Anger is avodah zarah. Anger means I don't believe that Hashem did this to me, Shmedel did this to me, so I'm angry at Shmedel. Ilu Eivet avodah zarah. The feeling of being separate from the Eibishter creates a feeling of avodah zarah. Was das ist doch die Nekuda von alle Avedas. Idol worship is the point of all the Avedas. Wie der Alter Rebbe is Masber, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Perich of Dalet. Yeah? Weil durch jeder Aveda, whatever Aveda you do, big one or little one, and so on, Was men is over if Ratzon Elyon one transgresses the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu werd men b'shas ma'isa abgerissen from the Likus, you are at that moment separate from godliness. Me'ein v'dur chachem v'dazara. Right? The Eibusha told me, take out the garbage. And I didn't. And you get killed for it. Now what did I do? It's a big deal. What's the answer? It's not that you didn't take out the garbage. It's that you didn't listen to the king. And when the king gives you an instruction, it doesn't make a difference to take out the garbage or start a world war. You have to do what you're told. Otherwise, you chayiv misa. Huh? Otherwise, you chayiv misa. So every Aveda, that's the whole point of these prakim, every Aveda is equal to Aveda Zara. Because you didn't listen to Hashem, it's called Merida, Bemelech, Malche, Amlacha, Makadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbeinu Makadosh Baruch Hu. Und das ist der Pirish Pnimi von Siyam HaKosav Mitzapayim Yetiriv. So the pasuk says mitzapayim, squeezing out anger. And an avodah squeezing out anger means squeezing out anger against avodah zarah. Says the Rebbe, Yoytziriv, it creates a fight, translates the Rebbe. Dorach ha-mavere v'tariv. When you do an avodah, you create a fight mit Neibishten, with Hashem. The Rayeh says by kas, it says by Goshub, even Beilet. And in anger, the war with Hashem is very explicit. Nit wie bei anderen Averes, more than other Averes, skip the parenthesis. The Rebbe ver das gesagt by mitzapayim, that's why the idea of squeezing out anger is mentioned by Midas HaKas, was dort nicht das Begoli, which is revealed. B'shas hayid, so mitzapayim, it means if I bring out anger, there's going to be machlokes, fighting. B'shas hayid bringt a korban, a Jew brings a korban, to tshuva, over the Avera. Oich demelt as mitzapayim yetziriv, there's another event of mitzapayim yetziriv. When you squeeze out anger, you create machlokes. Translates the Rebbe again. Nor dan it does be'efen from kavish kas. Over here, squeezing is not squeezing the anger out, but they're squeezing the anger down. Hanal un oich margiz yetztev yetzarad. The Gemara says you have to make yetztev anger to yetzahara. Skip the parenthesis. Un dorach dem is eich yetziriv. It brings out an argument, but in this case, it's an argument mitten yetzahara. So mitzapayim yetziriv means when people let their anger out, they get them in a fight. Right? What does it mean, Ruchnius? You squeeze out anger against the Aveda, and you create a fight with the Aveda. In part of Pshat is you squeeze out anger, you squeeze out Aveda Zara, you squeeze out the opposite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yetziriv, you're fighting with Hashem. The Chassidus says mitzapayim, when you squeeze out anger to a klipa, by doing iskafia, Yetziriv, create a fight with Yetzer Hara. So you read the same pasuk twice. When the fast they do apayim lashon rab, that was apayim lashon rab. Let's say it's mitzapayim, because there's two angers. The first anger is the anger of the Avodah Zarah, and the second anger is the anger of being angry about the Avodah Zarah. And in both cases, the riv. In the first case, the riv is against the Eibishter, and in the second case, the riv is against the Avodah Zarah. Der Kas was bring dem Riv mit dem Eibishter Rachmana litzlan. Apayim means, first of all, the anger that it brings against the Eibishter. Und der Kibosh HaKas lefrusha sich allein meisurim. And they're suppressing the anger to separate from Yisr. Okay, b'shas ha-tshuva of us ha-korban, I'm doing tshuva, bringing the korban, was bring dem Riv mit dem Yetzer Hara, which brings it with the Yetzer Hara. So the first mitzapayim is, I'm squeezing out anger against Hashem. The second mitzapayim is, I'm squeezing out anger for the sake of Hashem. And that's why it's the payim lashon rab, because there's two angers. As Kendach bever in a person can ask a question. We know that a Jew is above Avedas. Like it says in Alter Rebbe, a Yid, it's a Yem. A Yid, nicht will, nicht kann wenn Englisch vergettlichkeit. Und das, was a Yid fällt durch in an Aveda, or a Yid does an Aveda, und das nicht von a Lila. It's a trick from the Eibishter, from the Yetzer Hara, mit that Lamailach fällt Eibishter enforces, und the Rebbe sagt, no Jew is ever lost and left behind, because same concept for Yid Shuvaton, because it's the Eibishter doing his own experimentation, and when he's done, he's going to bring us back. Is to leave us at Gedav Zayin the Yerida of a Hess. So why do you have to have the Aveda? Why do you have to have the Yerida? Of them is RaShI Mamshech. For this you have a second Reich, Afas Hamitz. Afas Hamitz means the produce which you can squeeze out of animals is gone. Was geht of them Chele, was man is made inside a bucket was on milk which is extracted from animals. Das heißt, das was kommt da reis von der Schite of Kavisha, which you squeeze out of the squeezing. Nach dem, was tut tshuva after a person does tshuva, it is pedugmas in yinachal like milk. Now, you couldn't make this up. Really, this is... What's mitzapayim? If you squeeze out anger, that means Avodah Zarah, Yaitziriv, you're fighting with Hashem, right? Mitzapayim, if you squeeze out anger against the Avodah Zarah, Yaitziriv, you're fighting with the Yetzer Hara. Correct? That's the first pasuk, right? Now, but I'm a Jew, and I'm connected to the Eibishter. Why would the Eibishter allow me to sin? Why would that? I remember we were on Shlichus. I'll never forget it. We were Bachrim. We were all Bachrim once. And we verbringt zwischen sich. I'm going to be honest with you. We really did not drink mashke on a mashpia. But the brach zwischen sich. In yeshiva and al Torah, we should verbringen. But even on Shlichus, we verbring within ourselves. I remember we were sitting. And there were a few of us sitting around. Some of us were standing. It was an informal verbringen. And one of the chevre, happened to be me, I'm the philosopher in the group, said the word bechira, free will. So one of my friends, he's a Chassidish Yid, he's a shliach. Then he was a very hard-working, earnest, mesudik Chassidish bacher. He screams out, "The taka bechira, finished. There's no free will. Hey, no, forget about it. What free will? We're all pre-programmed. You do what you're told. Finished. No, finished. Whatever has to happen, happens. So the Rebbe is saying, the Eibishter makes me do an Aveda. Why? Why does he make me angry? Avodah Zarah, which makes the fight with Hashem. So he should make me angry. Teshuva. So I'm fighting with the Yetzer Hara. Who needs the whole business? Don't make me angry the first time. Don't make me angry the second time. Who needs it? What's the teretz? Office HaMates. What's Office HaMates? The idea of squeezing milk out of an animal. Now, what does squeezing milk out of an animal explain? So listen to this. This is very TaNaCh. This is very Chassidus. Cholov mitzadatme. Where does milk come from? From meat. Milk comes from meat. Think about it. Or in the RaShI, the Chazal is brought in TaNaCh, that blood somehow changes into milk. Now, milk you can drink, meat you can eat. You put them both together, also about Noah. So is milk kosher or treif?
You can't drink the blood.
It's kosher that came from treif. And that's what RaShI is saying. Look. Cholov mitzad atzmei, milk is the kasalkedaitach for teres emes, as cholov gedav zayin awesome. Milk should be treif. Because mitzadem was dam nechev, that's the cholov. According to Torah, milk is coming from blood. Blood is treif no matter what. And Beklal, meat is fleishiks and milchik is milchiks. That whole business of milk coming out of a cow, and the cow you can eat, the milk you can eat, but you can't eat them together is very strange. Yeah? Nor I know that this is kosher coming from treif, but it's kosher, you can eat it. As das is mutter. And not only is it permitted, top of the second column, page 21, biz as das wird adinyan von Shevach Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Zavas Cholov Udvash. So what's milk? It's a kosher product whose beginnings are treif and they're transformed into kosher, right? That's the explanation for why the Eibishter makes us do an Aveda. To make treif kosher. So, you see what the Rebbe just did? The two rayas that the RaShI brought to explain that the word mitz means to squeeze is hayron avodah. Number one, you squeeze out anger, avodah zarah, to make a fight with the Eibishter. Number two, you squeeze out anger, teshuva, to fight with the Yetzer Hara. Why did the Eibishter do it? For the same reason that milk is kosher. That's the answer. That's right. Was das weiß of the minion von is hapcha. The first Taichin mitzvah is to squeeze. The second Taichin mitzvah is to transform. Azach was al piteda hadas gedav zayin osur. Something that should have been osur, the teda might have been umishabeich gewesen. Says the Rebbe al derech zeh beruch nisan yonim. This is the Chassidus. The kavana for the mitzvah paim yetzirif. Why did the Eibishter make that we should squeeze out anger? That means avodah zarah and fight with Hashem. And then we have to squeeze out another anger as teshuva to fight with Yetzer Hara. Don't do the first one, and you don't need the second one. Why did the Eibishter make? We do an aved and do teshuva. The teretz is milk. That's the teretz. Was frier der Mensch ewig geworden aveda. First, the person did an aveda. Und es gewend der Rufun Riv. Legabi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, made a fight with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Und dennoch dem Kevish Kasa, then you squeeze out an anger against the anger. Und der Riv mit Yetzirah, and you developed a new fight, but now with the Yetzirah, is to leave them inyan ha'eskafia. The first touch in mitzvah payim is eskafia, then you come to the second touch in mitzvah, which is hapche. Ibemach dem Ra'af Tei, which is transformed the evil into good. Via Zakten Tanya, Kol Pola the Shalom Aneh, V'gam Yoshem Miropi, Yoshem Mirisha, and so on and so forth. Gewaldig. So the Chassidus is fascinating. I mean, the RaShI is exact. But the Chassidus is ganz geschmack. The first pasuk is saying that the Eibishter makes you do an Averis, they should do Teshuva. Why? Because of his hapche. And the Rebbe finishes the Sicha, last paragraph, and Durch dem wird Reich Nechech Al Hashem. Because you take treif and you make it kosher. Because this doesn't take Perich of Zayin. Dvarim Charif and Mechumatzim, things which are so sharp and so sour, you can't possibly eat them. RaShI Metuvalim Umutakanim hated, they're properly seasoned and properly cooked and prepared. And then Shenasu Madanim Lahoshev Hanefesh, they become the tastiest foods, right? Which is taking the Aved and make it into a mitzvah. Und es wird es da gekale Kutschbricha b'kol ha'olam. I'm impressed. I'm impressed.